Hello, everybody. My name is Fernando. I work at Oracle. And the purpose of my talk today is to show you a study that I did about all the major cloud messaging services, and also to compare them with Zaqar. So this is a pretty dense topic and a pretty dense presentation, so I'll have to skip through some slides, but they will be available online as well. For all of you, especially the code slides I will skip, but you will be able to get them online and use them in your projects. So messaging. Messaging has been in part of every single major enterprise platform since the mainframe. So every once in a while we reinvent messaging. We add a few APIs, we add a few protocols, we update some of what we already had. We kill some, and we create a new generation of the technology. And the reason why you do that is because messaging continues to be a very good solution for many problems. For example, for work offload problems, for batch processing, and especially for even notifications. So this is applications and devices talking to each other through a broker. So messaging will continue to be with us and has been recently updated for the cloud. We will compare 9 cloud messaging services, but there are actually more. As I said, every time we reinvent messaging, we create new APIs and new protocols. So the list is huge. You can make a whole conference about these things. What's important to keep in mind is that in the on-prem world, you can message through a broker like Apache ActiveMQ, through app server like Oracle WebLogic, and now in the cloud you use a cloud service, usually with a familiar REST API. Some services actually provide other APIs, as we're going to see, but it basically behaves like all other platform services. Even though Zaqar is a very new project and it's a very new implementation, it was only introduced in Liberty, meaning last year, it is already being compared to other services. So hopefully this presentation will help those of you that have to compare Zaqar to the other services that have been there for longer than he has. So just to illustrate what I'm going to say, and I promise to skip the other slide, but this one I have to talk a little bit. This is how sending a message to Zaqar looks like in Java, right? The important thing about this slide is the line in red. That takes the X project ID header. OpenStack Zaqar is the only multi-tenant cloud messaging service. So even though you have all these other services, this is the only one that is really multi-tenant. Probably because it is one of the very few that was specifically designed for the cloud. So other services, as we're going to see, they are multi-instance. So you have to create a different instance for each tenant, but Zaqar is different. It's multi-tenant. So you have a single Zaqar instance that can serve many projects. That makes a lot of difference from architecture to pricing. So that's important to keep in mind. The other important thing about this slide is that you only make one API call to send a message to Zaqar. It's very important. The number of API calls can be very important for performance, and it can be very important for pricing. So keep in mind for now that Zaqar only takes one call. It only takes one call to send a message in Zaqar. To receive a message, it takes 2 because you actually have to claim it and then delete it. Which is a common pattern in all these cloud messaging services. For those of you that, like me, come from the Java world, you are not used to this. You're used to a single receive operation that also deletes, right? but it's not like that in all of these new cloud messaging services, except one that we're going to see that is actually modeled after JMS. So for the first service that we're going to compare, and I'll have to run through those slides, is the Oracle service. So the Oracle service only runs in the Oracle Cloud. It will soon be available in private and hybrid clouds through the Oracle Cloud Machine. It supports queue and topics. It is actually modeled, this is the one that's modeled after the JMS API, so it supports pretty much everything that JMS does. And also supports notifications. So in addition to queues and topics for general messaging, you have HTTP and HTTPS and OMCS notifications. So that's new, but that's actually very common in cloud messaging services. We're going to see some of that later. It's multi-instance, it's not multi-tenant, right? It has a REST API. It supports batch. That's important. Again, you want to save calls. You don't want to make too many calls to the server. So having an API that supports batch, it's very interesting, right? So if you can send multiple messages at once or receive multiple messages at once, you save performance, and you probably save pricing, right? You save on pricing too. It only has a Java SDK, and Oracle has both a metered and a no-metered pricing. This is something very, very difficult to choose, because you really have to know your application to know which pricing model to pick. We are going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So Zaqar is very different. It's mostly for private clouds, even though it could be deployed in a hybrid or public cloud. It only supports queue messages. It's really multi-tenant. It adds a WebSocket API. It's actually the only one that does that. So it has a WebSocket API. It does support batch. The Oracle service doesn't, and it offers flexible pricing. Because this is running a private cloud, you have much more flexibility. You can come up with whatever pricing model works better for your customer. So to send a message to this service, it takes 4 calls. To receive a message, it takes 5. So this should illustrate how different a service that was created for the cloud is. Different than a service that existed before and has, for now at least, been changed somehow, right, to work in the cloud. So this should illustrate it, and it will happen with other messaging services as well. So let's run through this. So there's the Amazon service, the Simple Queue service. It also compares well to Zaqar. It's not multi-tenant also. It doesn't have the WebSocket API. It doesn't have the price is not as so flexible. And in AWS, in addition to the API call, you pay for the networking. The good thing about AWS, though, is that they have SDKs in many different languages. Just newer generations of developers, they want samples and they want SDKs in their own languages, much more than the generations before them. So having this really helps, and AWS has that, and that's really good. So again, the code sample, it's one call to send, one call to receive, 2 calls to receive. Very well designed API for the cloud. There's a second AWS service, which is only for notifications. It is by far the most sophisticated notification service out there. It can actually send you an email when somebody sends a message to one of your topics. It's the only service that does that. Zaqar has no notifications at this point. So again, the code sample, it only takes one API call to send a message. Then there's the Google service too. Like AWS, Google provided SDKs in many different languages. That's interesting. It's also interesting that in addition to the API call and the networking, in the Google service, you pay for the storage. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And And it's also not multi-tenant. It also doesn't have the WebSocket API, which is particularly important for like browser-based applications or mobile applications, because you can talk directly with the messaging service. You don't need to go through another layer to get there. So this is important, and again, the pricing can be much more flexible. The API is also very well designed. So 1 call to send, 2 calls to receive, just like Zaqar. There's the IBM service. They actually have 2 of them. This is the first one. It's available in public, hybrid, and private clouds. It is the first one that adds AMQP support, which is familiar for people doing on-prem messaging. It doesn't have a CLI, which is odd for the OpenStack community and probably odd for all system admins, right? It doesn't have it, but Zaqar does, right? It doesn't support batch also. So there's the code, 1 call to send, 1 call to receive. You have the Message Hub, which is the second IBM, much more sophisticated service. This is the nice thing about this one is that it's actually Kafka in the cloud. So Kafka is increasingly popular messaging broker in big data and IoT projects. So this is you getting Kafka in the cloud from IBM. They're the only ones that have this. So it's interesting. It works well. You basically use the standard Kafka API. So that's good, right? Even though it doesn't have a CLI, which makes some things complicated. It doesn't support batch, but anyway, it's an interesting service. So again, 1 message to send, 1 message to receive, and for those of you that are developers, this is a standard Kafka API. Nothing special about it, The last services we're going to see are the Microsoft services. Microsoft also has 2 services. This one, the Q service, is particularly interesting because they charge per gigabyte, right? So you've seen API calls, you've seen networking, you've seen storage, but this one charges by gigabyte. So it's even more complicated to try to estimate this, perhaps, right? Because how can you know, right? I mean, it takes some preparation, right? So again, 1 call to send, 2 calls to receive, and this is the last one. You have the service bus, just like the Message Hub is more sophisticated than MQLite for IBM. The service bus is more sophisticated than the Q service for Microsoft. Microsoft also has SDKs available for everything, and very good documentation for all of them. That's interesting. They support both AMQP, like IBM MQLite, and the familiar REST API. That's also a good thing. And another interesting thing is that in addition to the API call, they have a base charge. They're the only ones that have that. So 1 API call to send, 1 API call to receive. So to sum things up, Zaqar actually already compares very well to competition. Even though it's a new OpenStack service, a new OpenStack project with a very small development team still. It's the only multi-tenant cloud messaging service. It's the only one with a WebSocket API, which again can be very important for some applications. It has batch support when other services don't, and that's good. It saves you performance and it saves you money. It has a CLI. I mean, every once in a while we see people in the OpenStack community complaining about the CLIs, but we don't realize that they're not there for other clouds and for other cloud services out there, and they make life much easier. And there's also the option for flexible pricing. I mean, having your messaging service behind the firewall gives you possibilities that you don't have in the public cloud. To finish, the most difficult thing about the cloud messaging thing is not really learning all these APIs or even coping with these protocols and all these different technologies, but it is really to try to anticipate how these things are going to work in production and which pricing model you should pick. So it really takes a lot of effort, right, to understand the application deeply, all the message flows, all the formats, all the sizes, all the volumes, and come up with a perfect solution. But I'm sure that at some point we're going to figure it out. Thank you very much for attending.